Black Politics Today. An eye for what's at stake in global politics and your source for the social, economic, and political impact of public policy on the African American community. Your host, Kelly Michael Williams, is a political strategy veteran with an undefeated campaign record and the political experience that spans nearly 3 decades, from Mayor Willie Brown in California to President Barack Obama in our nation's capital. So get ready for a fresh and honest approach on the politics that affect you and your family the most. Now, your host, Kelly Michael Williams.
Hello. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Kelly Michael Williams. I want to thank you for joining us again tonight for another broadcast of What's at Stake right here on Black Politics Today. As you know, I always am excited when I have opportunity to get and gain some insight, some wisdom, and all of the good stuff that I like to talk about right here on BPT. And of course, tonight is no different. I'm even going to switch up a few things because as the day has progressed, of course, you know, we have things go on and the news cycle and what happens. So, of course, I like to talk about a whole lot of stuff that ends up coming back where I might get a little antsy and start using a few choice words, things like that. But I'm going to be good tonight. I'm going to do my due diligence and I'm going to be nice because one of my guests tonight, although I'm sure back before Christ, he would have said a few words, but now after Christ, I'm sure he'll get on me if I get too out of hand. Although he is one of my homeboys from California, I'm excited to have him and cannot wait for him to join us. But I'm even more excited about this new brother I got coming tonight. Because you know how it is. I search and I start looking for people that I want to talk to because I want to see who's doing what, where they're doing it, why they're doing it, and how is it going to impact us, how is it going to benefit us, and what steps do we need to take and make sure that we can be recipients of the good stuff and agitators of the bad stuff, if you know what I mean. And so I'm looking forward to having this discussion tonight. As always, I'm expecting for highlights by these powerful individuals and with no doubt have you wishing that they were on my show every week. These purveyors of wisdom and knowledge of all the things that they know about, have worked on and have done over the course of their lifetime. And quite frankly, these are some young brothers. Okay, so I'm not talking about people who have been here, you know, doing stuff back in the 60s or 50s. I'm talking about brothers who've been doing stuff since 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, 2000. And I'm excited as well as just looking forward to this conversation as we come into the final week of the shortest month of the year that has always been designated as our month. And I don't know who decided that we was going to take this month. And maybe it is because, you know, Valentine's Day was in the month. I have no idea why and where. I need to research that because the next show we're going to do, I'm going to talk about that because like Black America Web, we 24/7, 365. So on Black Politics Today, we Black history all the time. We are pro-Black all the time. We may slap a few brothers, but hey, depending on what side of the aisle they on, if they come out of their mouth crazy, you know what we're going to do. And that's just the way we operate up here. But certainly, we don't like the fact that we get the shortest month out of the year to get out there to talk about what we need to talk about. But I'm excited nonetheless to discuss Black history topics, not necessarily Black history, but impactful topics that have affected African Americans for at least 20, 30 years. And then those things that have affected us and impacted us over 50 years. Reconstruction, Flashback, Malcolm X, Flashback, things like that we need to discuss and talk about. And therefore, we're going to get started by addressing the breaking news that came out this past weekend with the dying declaration of former MPD police officer Raymond Wood, who infiltrated the civil rights organization. He essentially, by his own words in this letter that he wrote as a dying declaration and having his nephew speak to us about or release this past weekend. At least that's when I guess it broke the news. He talked about setting up the protection detail of Malcolm X, so they would be arrested the day before this assassination was to occur, and that his supervisors at the NYPD were complicit, as well as the FBI or the Department of Justice. And that whole revelation, many of us knew was there anyway. But the fact that now it's come out publicly, and there are some rumblings about now a new investigation by the Department of Justice and what's going to happen and where it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, etc. It's one of those things where now we need to look at and see what happens. But the irony for me is that the Justice Department was created as a result of the Civil War, ending of the Civil War and end of slavery, and the continuing abuse and lynching of Black folks. It was supposed to be that agency that came in to say, okay, Black America, we're going to help you out. We're going to put this agency in place to protect your civil rights, or your rights, period, under the Constitution. And yet and still, they were the ones who initiated killing Malcolm, Martin, anybody else, everybody else that's out there. And we're seeing it today. So it has continued. It has not stopped. And the question is, how do we deal with that revelation in our local jurisdictions, our local police, and et cetera? Because we're seeing Black men, even in 2021, even with Joe Biden in office, even with Merrick Garland being, starting hearings today, still being shot and killed. Just in LA this past weekend, dude was shot 4 times with 2 people on him for jaywalking. Not from California. Jaywalking, quote unquote, yeah, it's a crime, but they give you a ticket. They shot this brother for jaywalking. 2 cops jumped on him for jaywalking. So the idea that this revelation comes out and that things are going to be different is, I don't know how we're going to deal with it. So my guest tonight, one of my guests tonight, is a prolific and powerful intellect, activist, steward of civil rights, economic empowerment, and political prowess, culminating with the foundation of what BPT stands for: the social, the economic, and the political impact of African Americans in our community. This brother right here is from, I believe he hails from Baltimore or in Maryland, but he is currently Representative Chris Rabb, and they call him Rep Rabb. He represents parts of Philadelphia County. Rep Rabb is the author of Invisible Capital: How Unseen Forces Shape Entrepreneurial Opportunities. As a result of this groundbreaking work, he was invited to teach business at Temple University. And as a result of that, he had the opportunity to unionize 1,500 fellow adjunct professors in a landslide victory for workers' rights. He is on a number of boards and commissions. He is a fellow Clinton administration alum, which we'll talk about as well. But what excites me most about this young brother is his great-great-grandfather was the founding publisher of the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper, for which he still serves on the board. And that right there is something that, because of Black Politics Today magazine, I'm excited about. So we're going to talk about that probably too. So we're going to get into that as well. But of course, I need to get him to write some articles for BPT. All right. Also joining us a little bit later is the prolific orator, Dr. Frederick Freddie Douglass Haynes III, prophetic pastor, passionate leader, social activist, eloquent educator, engaging in pastoring the gospel of Jesus Christ, fighting against racial injustice, committed to economic justice, and empowering the underserved communities and touching and transforming the lives of the disenfranchised. And let me tell you guys, if you guys have not seen Pastor Haynes speak, teach, or preach, you in for some good stuff tonight. You're going to be saying amen, hallelujah. You may be clapping everything else. So put it up in the chat. Go on YouTube, go on Facebook right now, where you should be if you're not already. If you're listening to me on Blog Talk Radio, go to Facebook Live or Black Politics Day at Facebook, and Black Politics Day on YouTube, and watch this brother as he gets ready to join us a little bit later. Because let me tell you, I had the esteemed pleasure of sitting on the same panel with him to talk about politics and church and the things that are going on in the Black community. I was like, Jesus, is this what heaven's gonna be like? Am I sitting next to giants like this? I ain't gonna be no David. I ain't got a slingshot. I just want to sit here and enjoy and take it in, because I'm telling you, Pastor Haynes was ridiculous on that stage talking about politics and everything else. And he hails from San Francisco. So of course he was my brother. I'm working for Willie Brown in San Francisco. He's from San Francisco. It was just a win-win for us both. And I was just excited and ecstatic to have him, for me to be a part of it. I mean, I got invited, he got invited, and we were on the same panel. So it was great for me to be there. So let me do this now. Let me welcome my first guest, Rep. Rabb, my brother from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is, as I said, the representing the 200th district, the 200th district. Now they got a whole lot of districts in Pennsylvania. He represents the 200th district of Pennsylvania, which encompasses Pennsylvania County, and I think some of that is Grave. Tell us that district in the area, some of the cities that you represent.
So I represent the northwest corner of Philadelphia. So it's all within the city. I represent 2.5 neighborhoods or roughly 63,000 souls in Northwest Philly.
All right. Yeah. So that's Rep. Rabb that we're going to call him. And of course, you can hit him up at Rep. Rabb on Twitter, and certainly give us your comments. Hit us up in the comment section on Facebook and or YouTube, and or you can give us a call. If you want to join the conversation, you give us a call at 516-590-0143. That's 516-590-0143. And that's going to be on Blog Talk Radio broadcast, as well as right here on YouTube and Facebook. You can also hit us up in the comment section, and I'll be switching between screens to check your questions and get your comments. And of course, we'll send those over to the representative as we can. But let me start with you, Rep. Rabb, my brother. I said about the fact you might be from Maryland and Baltimore because of your grandfather. The reality of it is that I recently met, and I don't know if they're the relatives of yours now, the people who run the Afro-American now. And we were talking about my magazine, Black Politics Today, and what they're doing. And so I'm excited to talk to you about that as well, and just get the historical perspective, because thinking about what your great grandfather did in 1890.
1890s, yeah, early 1890s.
1890, everybody. Okay. And that was right after the Justice Department was established in 1870. He establishes the Afro-American in 1890, and I'm sure he's written about and had to deal with some of the issues like Malcolm X and the lynchings and killings. When you heard that and you heard about this occurring, what were your first thoughts? What ran through your mind about this coming public? Something that, again, we've pretty much already known, but now it's coming out public, and the person who was responsible for it is given a dying declaration.
Well, it's another confirmation that Black folk aren't crazy, right? Like this. Right. This is not this is an anticlimactic but important news story, right? Because it validates what many of us already knew. The fact that mainstream America, and I really mean white Americans in particular, did not have the internal fortitude or moral courage to look at themselves in the mirror collectively and see what their own country is capable to do to fellow Americans, is something that now they don't have the luxury of that ignorance. And these young white folk who are out here with the Black Lives Matter stuff and all the all the protests, and they're talking about racial justice, they're talking about white privilege, whiteness in ways that no previous white folk, including those in the 60s, had the sophistication or commitment to doing, is encouraging. And these are the white folk we need to entrust with talking to other white folk. That's not our job.
Right.
That's not our job. right? You need to handle your own business. We need to clean our own houses. We're not trying to do something that is the responsibility of white folk. And so there's going to be a critical mass of white people who are like, damn, wow, the FBI is really capable of doing this. And they're catching up to Black consciousness around what has always been the norm. So you talk about DOJ, we can talk about law enforcement, period. I'm in Pennsylvania, where policing has been around for 321 years. It literally started in the year 1700 as a night watch. And then it moved about a century later into a day watch, where they conscripted, which is a fancy word for being voluntold into service, poor white men to surveil Black men.
Right.
Free Black men, enslaved Black men, because then there was slavery in Pennsylvania, as there were in other northern states like New York, where I have my ancestors who are in New York, Maryland, Kentucky, Mississippi. I'm a family historian and genealogist, so this goes beyond one ancestor who founded one newspaper, 100 odd years ago. This talks about the very anatomy and landscape of our country. So what we're seeing here is a confirmation of what we already knew. Okay, and what this means is, when we talk about the government, it is not a monolith. We, the people, control the government, but we, the people, has been very narrow because of who had voting rights and who could influence the political process that allowed for people to be appointed such that they could say, okay, we're going to kill this brother over here. We're going to lynch this person over here. Knowing the connection between the atrocities that have happened through the U.S. government, federal, state, and local over generations, and our complicity by not being civically literate enough to utilize our collective power as Black people, that's on us. That's on us, right? And so the fact that you have a show that connects the dots is a powerful and dangerous thing. That's what we need, but we need more of it, because the folks who are talking, who are using the more common narratives, they're not folks like you. They're folks in corporate media who are trying to marginalize our stories for a particular purpose, because they're an extension of corporate America.
Right.
And they are, so if you look at, a lot of people say, well, liberals like MSNBC and conservatives like Fox News, right? But MSNBC, before Comcast got involved, was owned by General Electric. General Electric is one of the largest defense contractors in the world. So are you telling me that they're going to be comfortable with their journalists running stories about the military-industrial complex? Of course not.
Of course not.
But we need to know that a half a dozen corporations control 90-odd% of everything we consume, from TV, radio, amusement parks, blogs, all of those things. They're all connected.
It really is, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the reason why we started BPT. Because coming from California, working with Willie Brown, and then moving back to DC and working in the Clinton administration, I recognized early on, especially in California, running up and down the state during campaigns, that we weren't really engaged enough in the process. We only engaged every 2 years. We didn't engage 365. We didn't understand the power of 365. We understood, okay, I'll vote, but then it was death just trying to get us to register to vote. Because we were talking about, I don't want to go on jury duty.
Right.
Not understanding, like you said, being intellectually competent to realize that if I'm on the jury, I can help that brother not be convicted if there is some wrongdoing with police officers.
And you can elect the judges potentially, depending on what state you live in.
Right.
My grandfather, who was the grandson of John H. Murphy Sr., who founded the Afro, was the first Black elected judge in Maryland in 1970. He was in the first cohort of Black elected judges. Black folk elected him, among others, so that he could administer justice, so that we didn't have to rely on a 100% white judiciary, and hoping that they would have a big enough heart to do the right thing.
Right.
And all of these things are connected. And his youngest daughter is someone you may know, Laura Murphy, because she was the chief of staff for Willie Brown.
Yeah.
So that's my aunt.
Here.
And then she ran the ACLU, the National Legislative Office, for 17 years in Washington, D.C. So I was born into it. So absolutely. I was born and raised in Chicago.
Okay, that's right.
And I moved to Philly 20 years ago. But my people are from Baltimore on my mother's side. And so that legacy has been 5 generations that this business has been in our family. And it's the oldest Black family-owned newspaper in the country. The oldest Black newspaper that's still in existence is right here in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Tribune. So there's a friendly rivalry. But what people need to understand about Black economic empowerment is when you own the media, the currency is knowledge. And we were so powerful as Black folk back then when the majority of white people were illiterate, that if you were caught as a Black person with a afro, that's what they called it, the afro paper, you could get lynched because they knew what kind of content was in these Black newspapers. This is why they had state laws, not federal laws, state laws that made it illegal for Black folk to read and write and to punish white people. For white people for teaching Black people how to read and write. So, when you talk about Malcolm, you said if you want to, if you want to hide something, you put it in the book, right? Because most people are not going to open that book. So when we talk about literacy and we talk about empowerment in politics, what you are doing now is an extension of this prophetic and revolutionary history of Black folk seeking to tell our own stories, because we were made invisible until we managed to create our own. And that's what we have to continue doing.
And that is the impact that I think we need to have, especially right now, looking forward, especially with what your state is doing, what Georgia's doing, what 28 other states are doing right now across the country, which is to roll back the clock, literally back to Reconstruction, and start holding us and lynching us and preventing us from being able to get the ability to actually access our vote, access equal rights, access education, healthcare, you name it. It's a rollback of what's happening. And I'm glad that you talked about the intellectual insight and understanding of that, because we are still afraid of taking the chance to utilize our ability to get that knowledge. And it seems like we're hesitant to step out, especially if we're in corporate America, or if we're if we have our business and we're building our business, we will sort of not extend it to the point where we're actually exercising the full force of our community.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Empower our community.
Yeah. My grandfather used to say the worst thing for a smart young Black man or woman is a good job, because it makes you complacent, particularly if it's a corporate job, right? It makes you complacent. Like, oh, maybe the white man's ice is colder. No, that type of complacency, that's what gets us into trouble. So when we talk about the history, the sterling history of Black folk empowering ourselves, I tell my sons, who are now teenagers, ever since they were little, every single day we've been in this country, we've fought back. We've resisted, whether it's openly or quietly. So we talk about the house Negro and the field Negro, right? As though they were opposed. Most of the time they were in cahoots, right? Who is going to poison the master? It was the house Negro.
Right.
Right? It was not the field Negro who wasn't let into the house. Who was going to do the work slowdowns? Right. Who was going to steal the hogs so they could feed their families and prepare? That was the field Negro, right? We make this assumption that because we don't look like we're not in the same realm, that somehow we are the enemy. The enemy has always been the same. And that's the folks who created this fiction of whiteness. So this notion, this raggedy notion of white supremacy, which has never really existed, is furthered by us accepting the narratives that we are force-fed through mainstream media and through all these institutions. But we've seen something really powerful. We saw it last summer. When we think about the American society and capitalism, we think of this as this pyramid, right? This triangle where the lowly are on the bottom and the elite are at the top, and there's no way that this can move, right? Because they just are so powerful. What we've seen is the exact opposite, that it's actually very precarious, and with the right influences, you can swivel this and you can dismantle things that we have thought were in transient, right? And we've seen that young folk, Black folk, other communities of struggle have come together, and we have scared the hell out of all of these folks.
Completely.
And if we have that type of intentionality, there's no stopping us.
And I mean, like you said, during the summer with just the marches, when George Floyd was murdered, the idea that reality hit, and like you said, the young white folks went out there, but not only did it just happen in, you know, one state here or one state there, it went to state, then it went global. And the idea of it going global into other countries like Germany, Budapest, Brussels, London, England.
Hey, what about rural Pennsylvania?
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
rural Ohio. Ohio, they're walking down the streets where they're calling us the N-word and everything else, not Negro, but nigga. And we walking down the street, and there was white folks walking down the street holding up Black Lives Matters, you know, banners saying, hey, something's got to change. And when we look at your state and the legislature passing in 2019, the ability for everyone to vote absentee with no excuse, Republicans did that.
Yes, that was a Republican bill.
That was a
bipartisan bill.
Bipartisan bill. They did it. 18 months later, the very first bill they introduced is one to repeal that and restrict the no excuse, and then to take away drop boxes and you know, double ID and all this other stuff. I mean, your state, Georgia, and 28 states now are in this fight to disenfranchise Black folks. How are you guys dealing with that?
Well, I mean, we're going to win. I mean, listen, when we put our minds to it, we're not supposed to be here, right? They were supposed to have destroyed us generations ago, right? They were supposed to crush us, if not culturally, spiritually, economically. But that's, listen, if you have any respect for the ancestors, you know that they are still with us and they guide us. And the reason we are still here is because it's so much bigger than any one of us. And as a result, we are learning with each generation. Look what we did in Georgia. And I say we, I can't take credit personally, but I'm saying we Black folk, right? We saved democracy. What do Black folk do in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and other places across Pennsylvania? We saved democracy, right?
Wisconsin, now, Michigan, yeah.
That's right. On and on. Detroit and so forth, right? We did what needed to be done, and we often act in that role without holding to account the people who benefit most from our action, our collective action. So it is great to see that the Orange Menace is gone, but he was created by a much larger system, right? So there will be other menaces who may not be orange, but they're gonna be white, and they're gonna have some Black skin folk who do the bidding, right?
Right.
The question is this, though: do we understand the importance and necessity of our collective power in between election cycles?
Exactly.
Where the real work happens, right? Exactly. This is just, elections are just the starting point. You got to hold to account the people who you sought to elect, whether it's me going all the way up to President Biden. How are we holding them accountable? And so one of the things that I do is, beyond getting on shows like this, I do Facebook Live. Before the pandemic, I was doing community events, and I'm either reminding or telling people for the first time, this is what a state representative does. This is what I do, so you know how to hold me accountable. This is how I voted. This is my attendance record. These are my values. This is the money I brought home. All of those things, so you can say, okay, this brother's doing a good job, or he needs to step it up, right? Because if we don't know what people actually do, we give them a pass, and then we're often misdirecting our ire to other people. So, for instance, I'm at the state level. So there's people who think I'm in Congress. I'm not. I'm in the State House, 100 miles west of Philly.
Right.
But the reason state government is important, regardless of what state you live in, is we're talking about Reconstruction. Slavery was a state law. Let me repeat that. Slavery was a state law. It was not a federal law. It had, depending on what body you inhabited.
That's right.
And what geography you were born into would determine if you were a human being or property. So I have ancestors who were born in Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, Maryland, New York. If you were born in Maryland or Kentucky, and it was the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free you because it was not rebel-held territory. So you could be an enslaver, and you could be with the Union, and the people you owned would still be your property. Mm-hmm. People don't understand that. So when we talk about how our lives are being impacted by government, we can't just go straight to the White House or stop at City Hall. We got to see what's going on in state capitals, because Republicans have been playing this game really well for generations. And the things Black folk care about so much, whether it's increasing the minimum wage, which we are disproportionately represented in those low wage jobs, absolutely, environmental justice, gun violence, right? Public education, healthcare, all of the, the carceral system, right? Mm-hmm. All of that stuff, it happens on the state level. Now it happens on the federal and local level too, but sometimes it's the states that lead. And in Pennsylvania, we are the largest full-time state legislature in the country. We're the largest, right? That's why I have 200 by my name, because there's 203 legislative districts, and it's massive. But we have a $36 billion state budget. The third largest expense is locking up poor Black men in cages. That's what we're spending our third largest layout. Right. Like, that lets people know what the people in Harrisburg prioritize the most. Is if we know that most people who are imprisoned are nonviolent offenders, we're locking them up for years and years at $45,000 a year. For what? Right? Who benefits from this? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves, and we need to focus our attention on the people who make those decisions.
We really do, and you started by saying is that Republicans and white folks have been doing this for a long time. I remind my listeners and viewers a lot of times is that you have to remember that this system of government was made up without us even being thought of. We were never a part of it, and we're never supposed to be a part of it. It was something that we just happened to fall into when they started carving out districts for us to be able to actually run in and get elected in. But initially, we were the property. We weren't supposed to be a part of it. And it just happened that we're getting elected in these areas. But the idea that we don't understand how valuable our local and state governments are, and we're only waiting for 2 and 4 year elections to participate in, is the reason why states like yours, where you can have a massive turnout, Biden wins on the federal level, but you guys only need 8 seats in the House and can't get your 8 seats to take over as Democrats in the state government.
We lost 3 seats. That's right. We lost 3 seats. We lost Democratic treasurer on the state level. We lost auditor general because we don't understand down ballot voting, right? We need to understand everything up and down matters. So but it's our responsibility to do that.
Right. It is. It is our responsibility to do that. And it's from dog catcher on up. And that's the other reason why I'm hoping and praying that Pastor still gets here, because our churches used to be that hub for us. Our churches used to be able to help us understand the importance and understanding of what we needed to vote for, what actions we needed to take, what we needed to march for, what were the things that were coming down the pike that were important to our community, from water in Michigan and Flint to electricity in Dallas to voting in Pennsylvania to food security and food insecurity. All those areas are areas that we need to understand. And when your state legislators and your governments, the GOP, are introducing legislation that is counterproductive to the welfare of the citizenry, we need to make sure that Black folks understand what that impact is. How are you personally and in terms of the Democratic leadership teaching, educating the constituents to understand, yeah, we did okay by Biden, but we need to also do okay by our state.
Right, right. And I have a late uncle who was a political consultant who used to remind me, don't sell soap to people who don't wash. Right? Soap don't mean nothing to you if you don't wash, right? So let's back that up a bit. When you mentioned the historic role of the Black church, let's fine tune that statement, because even during Dr. King's ascendancy, most Black preachers were not down with him because they thought he was too radical, right? He was the aberration. He was not the norm for the Black church. And consistently, the pastors who speak up are the ones like you talk about, Reverend Haynes, folks who speak from the social gospel, where they're not using the Bible as an Amex. They're not using it to justify or intensify capitalism. They're all about spiritual, cultural, political liberation, right? And that is an important through line with the Black church. And those are the folks who we can rely on. But we can't rely on anyone who just happens to have a church if they're really just doing minstrel capitalism with the Bible, because that's not nearly high enough a threshold to direct us, to guide us, to lead us in ways that are actually about mass liberation.
Right. We have 28 states that have introduced these bills, 106 bills that they've either brought back from last year to this year. And in some of those states, some of them, 406 bills have come back to advance voting. 106 have come out to decrease or adverse effects to voting. Unfortunately, those 106 have more steam and power than those 406 to expand and increase. How do we address those issues in your state, but globally, a la Stacey Abrams, to make sure that we can actually attack these states? Look on the screen and see if your state's there represented. But how do we attack this, and how do we become advocates like you've done yourself?
Well, elections have consequences, right? So in Pennsylvania, we have a Democratic governor. The governor will veto any aggressively raggedy anti-voting bill, right? So that's a good thing. So they can put up all the bills they want. They don't have enough in our state legislature to override the governor's veto. So that's important. So, but we need to know back home that the governor has that power. Because if you say, oh, look, see, these white folk, they're just going to take away all our rights, so that's why I don't vote, because it's all meaningless. And no, you said, well, actually, even though Republicans are going to try to do that in the House and Senate in Pennsylvania, they're not going to be successful, because we as Black folk helped reelect a governor who believes in voting rights for all and wants to expand the electorate and protect voters along the way. And they're like, oh, okay, well, that's an entirely different context than the previous one. It's like, oh, here comes Republicans stealing all of our stuff and there's nothing we can do. I'm like, no, we actually already did it. We elected the right governor to protect us with his veto pen. And
now, let me ask you this,
that creates a different narrative.
In the counter narrative of that, is it better to let them know that the veto power is there, or is it better to engage them and entice them to fight for defeating, to making sure that they can change the majority, so that you don't even have to worry about bills like this coming up again, where they're more engaged?
All right. So that's a great question. I'm a both and type of Negro. Okay. So I believe in abundance. Right. So we honor the choices we've made collectively by electing the right person who protects our collective interests. And we say, why is it that these Republicans have these majorities, that they've dominated our chambers for so long? And then we say the reason is gerrymandering, which has been used as a racialized weapon for political incumbents to maintain their power for themselves and or their parties. So they cut around Black folk and Latinx folk and other folks so that they have as many districts for them as possible. So in Pennsylvania, we're in the top 3 most gerrymandered districts. That means when you look at the map and you see the maps, they look like an amoeba or a chameleon, right? Or a salamander, which is the origin of the term gerrymandering. Then you know that there's political nonsense going on behind the scenes. And that was created to ensure that Black folk have been marginalized, and whatever party has dominance to maintain that dominance indefinitely. So if we explain to folks what gerrymandering is and how it has hurt Black folk and the cities in which we often live, we can say, all right, well, then how do we combat gerrymandering? And we give them a roadmap to lay that out. But if you've never heard the term gerrymandering, or you believe someone's incapable of understanding that because they don't have some fancy degree, then we're complicit, because you got to reach people where they are. We are intelligent people, whether you have a GED or a PhD. It's incumbent upon public servants, those of us who are elected, and other folks, whether they're reverends, civil servants, whomever, to explain, to provide that civic literacy, to give people not just hope, because hope can be used in very cynical ways, but give them the information they need to make sound decisions, and let them see all the things Black folk have done right. How many times are we going to talk about we're the only people who's done this and so forth? Like, we pathologize ourselves as opposed to identifying the pathology, which is white supremacy, right? That's the pathology. Right. And white supremacy hurts white people. And let me tell you an example, because it goes to what you're talking about with this legislation. If you're a QAnon Trumper and you live in a trailer park in Central PA and you're a white woman and your man left you and you got a baby and you got to take care of that baby and you have a GED, right? You never met a Black person. You don't want to meet a Black person. And you working at Denny's. At Denny's in Pennsylvania in 2021, brother, you are making $2.83, and everything else has the tip minimum wage. Yep. The tip minimum wage is $2.83. That means you got to hustle to make that tip. And if you're a woman, you are exposing yourself to sexual harassment, to sexual intimidation, right? Because men are, and this is part of when we talk about patriarchy and all these things, you're putting yourself at greater harm just to get by, to help your family. The tip minimum wage is a legacy of slavery, because white employers, after slavery was abolished, did not want to pay Black people for our labor. Yep. So they said to white folk, look, if you want to tip them, you can, which is a holdover of European practices. You can pay them, but we're not paying them. That is why the United States is so anomalous in that way. $2.83 per hour in the richest country in world history. And that's what the most racist white people in rural America are getting paid, because of racism and the legacy of slavery. So when we talk about white supremacy, this is not what is just best for Black folk. This is what's best for a society that may one day actually become a civilization. And that's why I actually believe and talk about reparations in front of white audiences, brother. I talk about how reparations is good for you as it is for Black folk. Right. But we have to connect the dots.
They don't, right. You have to connect the dots, because they're listening to the rhetoric of, whether you, even if you're a poor white person, you're better than that Black person over there.
Right.
And they believe in all that. They still don't have a pot to piss in, and they sit there struggling worse in some cases than we are. Right. And you touched on something, with going back to the tip wage and the slavery and things of that nature. I'm still talking about how the legislation and legislature controls and moves, but let's take it a step further, because one of the things that's happening now is a number of states are dealing with the idea of teaching the 1619 in school, right? The 1619 project.
Yeah. And
they're outlawing it to be taught in school because they don't want that version of slavery to be taught. I mean.
But here's the thing. Here's the fight. The fight is going to happen in white families on Thanksgiving and holidays and stuff. When these woke young white folk are like, no, squelch that mess. I'm not trying to hear that. Like,
right.
They're going to have, just like the Republican Party is imploding. They got to decide, are we the party of Trump? We the party of Lincoln, or we the party of Ronald Reagan, whatever. The same thing is happening in white communities. And it's not really communities, because community suggests shared interests and perspectives. And what we're seeing generationally is there's a growing percentage of younger white people, and not just in and around cities, right? Because you talked about protests happening in rural parts of our country where it was primarily white folk. They are being able to connect the dots in ways that their parents and grandparents never could. Part of that is social media, right? So for the 150 years, we've been talking about police brutality and police terror in this country. Rodney King was the turning point because it was videotaped. Right. Then you fast forward, 30 years, and you have social media. So what we are accustomed to seeing as Black folk every day in terms of our dehumanization by law enforcement is seen as much through social media as in every other community. And so they can't say, oh, Black people are complaining all the time. They're finally saying, damn, that's messed up. I'm not trying to be down like that, which creates interesting bedfellows, right? We say in politics, you have strange bedfellows. Right. You're seeing people who are like, yo, that's wrong. Like, I don't know. I'm not a voter. I'm not a leftist. I'm not this or that, but I know wrong when I see it. And that's not cool. And the only time I'm seeing is when Black folk who are doing nothing wrong are getting beaten down, killed, whatever. And that may be the on-ramp to them being politicized and being brought into something bigger than themselves. And that's a great opportunity. So there are going to be a lot of advocates for the 1619 Project who are white, who say, this stuff that Trump is pushing and my granddaddy's pushing, that's some BS. I want the real stuff. And it can't just happen from Black folk. If it just relies on 12% of the population, it's a non-starter.
And when you look at that, because those are the people who are going to be at that dinner table you talked about saying, I don't believe this. I don't take this. But they're also ones who are coming out of hip hop. Their friends are African American and they're dating African Americans. And so they're married African Americans. And so now you're having that fight at that table where they're like, wait a minute, I didn't want this. I was not expecting this. What's happening here and how are we going to deal with it? And like you said, they're going to implode because they don't know what they want to be. They don't know if they want to be Lincoln. They're saying Trump is it. Trump's not even in office, but they're still following him. But they're now going to have to pay the consequences of doing that. How, in your state, how is the QAnon and the Trumpers and everything moving, and where are they moving to?
That remains to be seen, but they are very well represented among my colleagues. They actually just introduced, I think it was this morning, a resolution to impeach the governor, which they've done before. If there's a Democrat they don't like, they will introduce something to impeach them. 75 of my colleagues, all of whom are Republicans, signed an open letter contesting the validity of our own elections in our own state, which is odd because that includes the elections where they won.
Exactly.
So they're on the same ballot. So it's not okay, for Trump, but it's okay for me because my ballot is good. But Trump is on every single ballot across the state. So it's part of it is these folks are just crazy. The other part is these folks are just cowards. And then there's the Venn diagram of ignorant cowards, right? And then there's the small minority of Republicans who are like, I can't be down with that. And those are the ones, who have to decide, am I betraying my party as, many people think, or is the party betraying me? Because we have to remember that, most Black folk were Republicans until the New Deal, right, in the 30s, because that was more aligned with the collective values of Black folk. Democratic Party was associated with Dixie and Dixiecrats and that sort of thing.
Right.
But we have to be aware that these evolutions always happen. And we need to make sure what our collective interests are to make sure that whatever party we're affiliated with is being accountable to us, because without Black folk, you can't have a Biden. Without a Black folk, you can't have, there are virtually no races statewide or certainly nationally that do not depend on Black folk. Mm-hmm. So what are we doing with our collective power? And once our guy won, how do we keep him responsible? Because we gave Obama a lot of freedom because he was a brother, right? Right. And that's the challenge and difficulty with representational politics. But now we got an old white guy where we don't have that same threshold, right? And he's talking about racial equity. But if he has policies that do not honor that pledge, then we got to march on him. We're not just marching one way. We got to march on anyone who does not do us justice, because if they get away with it, that diminishes our own collective political power.
Exactly. And we have to help our people understand that, because I don't think a lot of times they understand that. If you want to give us a call at 516-590-0143, 516-590-0143, get a question in before we conclude. You can give us a call here or put it in the chat box, and we'll ask the representative what you have. So talk to me about your legislation, your omnibus bill, and what it's going to do and how you look to move it forward, and how's it going to impact African Americans?
Well, just imagine you not having to worry about voting within a random 13-hour period, which is the case in Pennsylvania. You have 13 hours to vote, right? A year ago, we expanded it to voting up to 50 days beforehand through vote by mail. The pandemic hit as soon as that new law kicked in, so we couldn't do it that way. And then we had mail issues through Trump, right? So we had to be very creative, but ultimately it's what other industrialized nations do, and some red states where it's all mail in. What's the point of going to What's the point of going to a polling place if you just throw it in the mail, or throw it in a drop box, which is not controlled by the U.S. Postal Service? It's controlled by that elections commission. They're the only ones who have access to it, and it's been working for decades in Republican-controlled states without any issue. But once you let Black folk near it, because they know how we're going to vote, and that scares them. I want people to understand this. When you see these awful, ridiculously racist bills, I want you to smile. I want you to understand our full power as Black folk, because if they weren't scared, they wouldn't be doing this stuff.
Right.
They wouldn't be doing it. That means we're doing something right. Now we can't be complacent. We can't rest on our laurels. We got to, we always, take it to the next level. That's what we do as Black folk, right? Yeah. We need to do the same thing in the civic and political space and say, oh, Stacey Abrams and Black folk in Georgia scared y'all? Y'all ain't seen nothing yet.
Right. Exactly. Right? Exactly. So how do you deal with the hypocrisy? How should Black America deal with the hypocrisy of these Republicans to say, we're going to introduce a bill 2 years ago that's going to do this, and because it doesn't work out the way they want it to, they reverse it and then come at us and attacking us? As you said, smile. But when we smile, how do we respond?
Well, I got to tell you, when I'm a progressive Democrat brother from Philly in a state where they hate Philly, where most of my colleagues have never been anywhere near a large city. Okay. So that lets you know what I'm up against. And they've been controlling the legislature for like 3 decades.
Yeah.
So when they show themselves, I do the smile thing, right? Kill them with smiles. But I also like to use their language against them. Oh, I love that.
I like you, Rabb. You like me, man. You like me.
Use their own language against them and just watch them just kind of
cringe.
Right? Yeah, because, I found this, and look, you had this experience too. There's a certain percentage of Black folk who have the privilege and the opportunity to engage white people as peers, and even smaller, who actually supervise white folk, right? The vast majority of Black folk do not have the freedom to say what they want to say to white folk who are mistreating them, right? So for those of us in positions of influence, I don't do it just because it's fun. I do it as a moral imperative and as out of a continuation of the legacy my ancestors have left me, to speak truth to power, not just to sound good and say, I got you, but to do something to them that they are not used to being experiencing, which is to being schooled by a Black person who is not afraid of his own excellence and his own worth, right? That scares folks in these positions.
Oh, vocabulary will kill them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Vocabulary will kill them. Okay.
And it's important though, because you can't you can't argue with a crazy person, because somebody looking at you doesn't know which one's crazy.
Exactly.
Right. So it's not about arguing. You can't be rational with irrational people. So a hypocrite, you don't really have those tools. But if you use their language against them, man, it freaks them out. And maybe that's the starting point. But the real work is back home by organizing folks who are on the sidelines, who don't understand the power that we have, because every single time we've had a meaningful social justice movement in this country, Black folk have had our fingerprints on that progress. That's right. Always. That's right. And whatever you consider great about this country, and that's a term I don't really use, right. You cannot find a way, and we're in Black History Month, to extricate Black people from it. You can't do it. And again, I say this to young people too. The folks who were on the front lines in the 60s were teenagers. Mm-hmm. They were not old enough to vote, and they were putting their lives on the line. Black folk, women, folks who were from the most marginalized parts of society were leading. And it's whatever we have, whatever that we appreciate about our society today has come from those sacrifices, which includes protesting and marching, but other things too. Some things a little more quiet. We have to have all of these tools in our toolkit in order to succeed. But I got to tell you, if we don't fully engage in every aspect of society, we've already lost.
Right. So as we close out, what's at stake for us? What's at stake for Black America? What's at stake for Black folks in Pennsylvania and your community and across the nation? What's at stake for us?
Everything. We experience education apartheid in Pennsylvania. We are the worst of all 50 states in terms of disparities between the haves and have-nots in terms of state money for our public schools, which are overrepresented by Black and brown kids. I represent a city that is the most incarcerating city in the world. I represent a state that has the largest number of Black folk locked up who will be sentenced to death by incarceration in the entire country. Pennsylvania, which is only the 11th most populous state. We're in a state where it has been dominated by right-wing extremists for decades. Everything is on the line. But what we've seen in this past election cycle and what we've seen before it, when we organized on the streets, listen, we scared so many institutions and corporations that even the corporation that owns Aunt Jemima changed the name. We didn't even ask them to change their mind, to change the brand. Like, we're not talking about syrup, we're talking about justice. And like, okay, we're gonna do something because we're afraid they're gonna come after us. People were taking down statues, doing all kinds of things because they wanted to placate us so that it would distract us from the structural issues that we were most concerned about. And not just Black folk. We have to continue to keep our eyes on the prize by focusing on those systemic things and not the symptom facing that most folks are distracted by.
Exactly. Take us home, Rep. Rabb, and tell us how we can get in touch with you, how we can contact, how I can get you to start writing for Black Politics Today magazine. And I have you on the show next week, the week after. Like I told people, I knew it was going to come today. I knew it. I'm so sorry and so disappointed. I got a text from Pastor Haynes. He said he messed up on the time. He's out feeding people, and because he's in Dallas and everything that's going on in Dallas, I was hoping that would not happen because he texted me back this morning. He was like, I'm excited. Absolutely. I'll be there. So, of course, I'm going to hit him up for next week and get him back. But, hey, you might have to come back next week, Rep.
I'd be happy to. Okay. Just promise me that I don't have to follow Pastor Haynes because I'm not trying to do that.
No. I'll have you guys together. That way, okay. Have you together.
Yeah, don't set me up now. I can't follow a pastor. Don't do that to
me. but take us home and tell us how we can get in touch with you, what we can do, and what is the issue or the thing that we must be accountable for and accountable to for us to move forward.
You're going to like my response. Here it is. Whatever you are most concerned about, whatever you're most passionate about, whatever that issue is, the number 2 and 3 things you need to be invested in is electoral reform and media reform. And brother, I know I'm saying this to the right person, because if we don't control our own media, then we are fed the lies, the narratives, the stories that oppress more than any metal weapon. we need to be able to control how folks are elected and how our stories are told, because media and the elections have significant influence on every aspect of what we feel, what we experience as Black folk in the society. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me at Rep Rabb. That's Rep Rabb, like rabble rouser, because I love some good trouble. And that's Rep Rabb at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
All right, Representative, I just want to thank you right now and appreciate you, my brother, for coming on and giving us the opportunity to have you here tonight. Because certainly, as I knew as I was reading your bio, and I didn't even tell everybody all the stuff that's in your Bible. Princeton researcher, went to University of Pennsylvania, went to Yale. Yeah. And has been, I mean, advocating the fact that he went to Drexel, right? Taught at Drexel, taught at Temple, but went to Temple, got there because of his book, and then unionized the professors, right? The adjunct professors, 1,500 adjunct professors who would have no, tenure, accountability, nothing else, right? He unionizes them to where now they are there. I mean, it's a union. Come on now. Right. That's the brother that I love, and I'm going to have him back here on the show.
Listen, my ancestors would be proud of you, brother.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is a passion of mine. It has been on my spirit and soul, and that's why I wanted to take it from the media, from the TV to the newspaper, to the magazine, because we've never had a magazine. And once I realized that we had never had a magazine that talked about politics or news for us, we've had the newspapers, but not a magazine. I felt I needed to do that, and I needed to start that. And so we have a digital magazine that we have out there. You can go to our website, blackpoliticstoday.com, and you can subscribe to it digitally as well as in print, and certainly be a part of us. If you're a writer, if you want to write for us, please hit us up at info@blackpoliticstoday.com, and we'll certainly allow you to write and come out there. And Chris, some folks have set me up, said, hey, have him back. So I'm certainly.
Is that my mother? Is that my mother who said that?
Actually, it's one of our DC City Council women. She was the one that said, hey, have him back. So I am certainly going to make sure that we do that. Because don't sell soap to people who don't wash. I had to make sure we.
I love it.
We had to put that up and make sure it's out there so don't sell soap to people who don't wash, all right? So until next time, next week, Black people, I must tell you, I want to thank my brother for coming out. But as I say each and every week, what's at stake for you and your family, you have to determine that and decide, like Representative Rabb said, whatever it is, you need to go out there and do it. It has to be for voting rights. It has to be for civil rights. It has to be for judicial rights and just the education of our people. We have to make sure that we get educated. And if we're not educated in the traditional matter, we go untraditional. But we need to understand, and we have to use our intellectual influence, like Rep Rabb said, of understanding the process of economics, social, economic, and political. If we can do that, just as we did in this past election in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and even in Arizona, Latinos and Black folks in Arizona. I mean, come on now. The fact that we did that, and then we elected a Black man in Georgia, and we did it in a special election where we certainly don't ever show up. We can certainly do it across the country, and we're going to have to do it because, like he said, with gerrymandering and with redistricting, which is something I was going to talk to you about, Rep, but I didn't get a chance to. Redistricting, something we have to understand. We can't wait every 10 years to start doing something. We have to do that every selection cycle, every year, to make sure that we can win back and stop the decimation of our districts and stop having these gerrymandered districts carved out that now the Supreme Court says it's okay to do. We can't have that. We can't have that. So certainly get on board, understand it, see what's happening, and support this brother, and certainly get out there and vote and advocate and participate. Until next week, if it's social, economic, or political, it's Black Politics Today. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And certainly, Rep Rabb will be back Okay, we're gonna have you back, my brother.
Thank you for listening to Black Politics Today on Eye for What's at Stake in Global Politics with your host, Kelly Michael Williams. Join us live each Monday from 7 to 8 p.m. Until next time, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and download us on iTunes at Black Politics Today.
Thank you, man.
My pleasure, brother.
All right.